Hello and welcome to another tutorial back on my channel, The Art of Tiffanie Mang. And today I wanted to show you how I would tackle a matrix or no-tan study from photo reference. Now, if you've taken my course Essentials of Paintings or watched me talk in any tutorials, you know that I love matrix studies. And whether you're studying from the masters and doing master matrix studies, or from photos or doing it for your own pieces, I really do think that they are truly an indispensable part of your planning and research and design workflow because it just helps you figure out so many things before you actually go into painting. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But of course, if you want to learn more in depth about why matrix studies are so powerful, I have a whole lesson and more about that in my course, Essentials of Painting. So make sure to check that out. It's right now running at Proco. And I also have a guided track version of my course on my own website where you get to watch the whole course, Essentials of Painting, and meet with me once a month for 2 hours in live Zoom sessions. So definitely check that out at Proco, the on-demand version, and the guided track version only offered on my site. So this is a picture that I took at Bowman Bay, Washington, and I really liked the harsh kind of lighting and the shapes that were created in the rocks. And I ended up doing a gouache painting of this. And so if you're curious how my process is, I do matrix studies before doing an actual gouache painting. I actually do that over value studies because I find that matrix, when I do a matrix study, I can go back to that matrix study as almost a fundamental floor plan guide track for, that doesn't make sense, but floor plan, let's say foundational plan for how I design my shapes later on when I actually go into color. So this has helped me in the past before when I have been just struggling with paintings and gouache or digital. If I do a matrix study, I usually find the answers in the matrix study, and it's quite amazing. And this is why I highly recommend you incorporate this into your practice. Now you can see what I've done is that I've actually started with a black canvas, and I'm essentially carving the light shapes into that canvas to create a sense of form and perspective and depth. And I like to work all on one layer when I do a matrix study. I also actually have an analog version, kind of a time lapse on my YouTube channel as well, which I will link above. And you can check that out. I do another kind of beachscape, but with Sharpie, which is kind of infinitely harder because you can't control Z. So when you do these analog style, meaning you draw it on paper and use a pen or Sharpie, I like to use Sharpie, it's a lot harder because you really have to have the foresight to plan ahead and really think about how you're going to design your shapes and light and dark patterns. Now, the reason why I love matrix studies is because you're really exploring the fundamental pattern of light and dark, which is different from light and shadow sometimes. Now, different paintings can have different levels of light and dark and light and shadow. And some paintings are more chiaroscuro dominant, which means they have a more light and shadow dominant pattern. And some paintings have a more light-dark pattern dominant scheme. So meaning, for example, if you can picture a lady with a white shirt sitting in front of a dark background, right? That would be a light-dark pattern primarily. In this case, this particular reference that I'm doing, or painting that I'm doing, I think it has a little bit of both, right? Because you can see a lot of the harsh shadows that are going on in the rocks. That to me is light and shadow because, you know, the sunlight is creating some harsh shadows in the rocks, but the sand itself is a light on dark shape against the rocks and against that dark canopy of trees in the back. So there's a little bit of both going on, and most paintings will have a little bit of both. And that's where it can get kind of tricky because, you know, a lot of times when people are doing matrix or no-tan studies, I'm going to use those two words interchangeably. I apologize for that. they can get really hyper-focused on all the detail that is made with all the shapes that they see in a photo reference. And when you're doing a matrix study, that's not really the point, in my opinion, to capture every detail that you see. For example, in this particular piece, there's a lot of rocks and tiny bits of rocks, and I'm not trying to copy those rocks. I'm actually trying to simplify it a little bit and find a pattern that works for my painting, that the rocks can cascade and lead into each other, and I create a pleasing pattern. So that's the challenge, because I'm not very good at painting rocks. So I knew that before I started gouache painting with color, I knew that I needed to figure it out in the design phase a little bit. So that's a little tidbit about matrix studies. Now, again, I go over this much more in my Essentials of Painting course. And to me, there's 3 tiers that matrix or no-tan studies are so great for. And I talk about those 3 tiers, starting from design all the way up to abstraction. Really, to me, matrix or no-tan studies are just really good at helping you see past the literal and into the abstract essence of whatever you're painting. And different references will pose different challenges, right? Maybe this piece that I'm choosing is quite literal. And maybe if you do master studies of other master artists, some pieces will be harder than others. That's what you'll find. And so exercise that I really love to have students do is just do 50 matrix studies of different artists, because each painting will present a different challenge, and it's going to really help your problem solving skills. And I think matrix studies are really great to help you with your problem solving skills. And honestly, painting is all about problem solving. It's really about problem solving. It's always this nice blend between intuition and problem solving. And you have to know how to activate both in order to create a successful painting. So just some great things to keep in mind. If you've never done no-tan study before, I highly recommend you try it. And by the way, no-tan actually means light-dark harmonies in Japanese, and I believe that's where the term was originated, if I'm correct. So you can see here, my study, I purposely have it small. I paint a lot of my things in thumbnails because I'm able to see the big picture. That's another thing I recommend. You can see that this is just done live. I'm not zooming in, and this really helps me see the big picture. Now, say right now there's a lot of design issues. The rock seems kind of formless. I need to figure out more of a structure in the rock. But what I go back and forth with in the matrix study is finding the balance of big, medium, and small shapes. So right now I'd say there's a big, giant, massive canopy of trees in the back forming a curve down. And then the mid-ground-ish with that rock cliff has the most complexity of shapes in terms of medium to small shapes. Now, if I break up that mid-ground cliff too much into tiny shapes, which is what a lot of people will be tempted to do because they see detail and then they just don't think about their shape design and just start kind of creating all these little tiny light and dark shapes, and there's not really any design to it. That can actually break up your piece as well. So I'm trying to be really cognizant as I am carving out. I like to see it as I'm carving out shapes, pushing back shapes, and constantly kind of like a sculptor pushing in and pushing out. And so that's what is going on in my mind right now. Although I might not be entirely successful, I'm constantly thinking about those things in my mind as I am putting down a shape. And so if I'm putting down a stroke, which to me, every stroke becomes a shape, I'm asking myself, is this helping the painting or is it detracting from the painting? And I think matrix studies can really help you see that without the fluff of color. So sometimes we can't always see that. We're so enamored with color. We're so distracted with color that we can't see that sometimes all these strokes that we're putting down are creating shapes that kind of break up the painting too much and are actually harming the painting, I like to say. And so when you strip out all that and only work with two values, you are able to see what works and what doesn't work a lot more. And yeah, so that's another reason why I really like matrix studies. Now, I'm going to do another quick plug in here. If you want to see how I go from matrix to color in a 3-hour workshop, I also have on my store, on my website, a downloadable whole 3-hour workshop called Capturing the Landscape, where I show how I do a matrix study and a quick color study to a refined color study of a master painting by Edgar Payne, plus a bonus demo from my Essentials of Painting course. And you get that all for $35, I believe, something like that. So definitely check that out on my store as well. So as I'm looking at this painting as a thumbnail, to me, there's a lot of scraggly shapes that need to be refined. I actually don't know what I'm doing right now. Cutting into that, I'm seeing if I cut into that kind of shore where the blue water is starting to come in, the tide's starting to come in, if that would help. I'm not sure if that's helping, so I might just leave that a dark oval shape later on. We'll see. And you know, when you're designing things like rocks that are rimlit like this, I always like to find ways that the light connects to each other, the light shapes. In this case, I'm talking about the shapes that are actually being hit by light. I like to find ways that they dance and connect with each other, because that's going to help your eye flow through the painting and create more of a cohesive design. I'm not saying I'm successful right now. There's still a lot of like little dots and pings and little strokes that I hate. So I'm really hoping I will clean that up later. But I'm still in the exploration, figuring out stage right now. And you're just seeing everything. I'm not editing anything. It's just how it's part of the process of figuring out, right? I will say the more of these that you do, the faster you will become. So that's why I like to say that quantity is key. And they might suck at first. Like you might do the first 25 and you're like, oh my God, this is so hard. I suck. These are hard. That's just proof that you need to keep doing more until something clicks, you have an aha moment, and just things start falling into place. Now, if you stay to the end, I'm going to show you the finished matrix study. And I'm also going to show you how I add value on top of a matrix study and add color. And really quickly, you can add mood and atmosphere just throwing color on top of a matrix study. And I think it's a really fun shortcut that can help you get a sense of mood, and while kind of maintaining to that structure that you've already established in the matrix study. So definitely stay tuned for that. Now, you can see right now that I've kind of redesigned from the original painting a little bit. I wanted to add a little bit of more foreground rocks to the cliff because I didn't like how there's a straight cutoff at the base of the cliff. So I wanted something to lead in a little bit more. And you can see now I'm still playing with the right-hand shore just to kind of find curves that fit the perspective a little bit. I'm using a little bit of the lasso tool to play around with that, and just still experimenting here and there. Now, I'm not sure I record the whole thing. I think I stopped and then I worked on it a little bit more, but I'll definitely show you the finished study. And in terms of what brushes I'm using, you can see that I'm using a really simple graphic brush and a round brush digitally. And that's really all you need. You just need something with a hard edge and something with a rounder, tapered edge that can give you different mark making. And so that's also why I like doing matrix studies, is because you really can simplify your brush palette and you can get a lot of different kinds of shapes, CSI shapes, right? C curves, S curves, and straights, not road mappy shapes, if you know how to manipulate your brushes and use them in a way that works for your painting. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm throwing on some grids to help me kind of check out my compositional choices. Now, grids is another thing I talk about in my Essentials of Painting course. And everyone knows about the rule of thirds grids, which is the magenta color. But you probably haven't heard of the centerline grid and the diamond grid, which are other grids I talk about in my Essentials of Painting course. So they're all very helpful in their own way. They help you decide the center line, where the center of the painting is, the bottom rule of thirds, the top rule of thirds. And a lot of times grids have been instrumentally helpful in helping me kind of figure out where I should avoid tangents or include tangents, or kind of connect shapes, group shapes, or bring forth shapes using the quadrants that are created, as well as the guidelines in the grids from the diagonals and the straights and things like that. So I definitely talk about more in that course. I won't touch on it too much, but you can see that my horizon is around the bottom rule of thirds. And you can see that I'm trying to include the most interesting parts kind of within the diamond area, which is the teal color. So they kind of help me guide me, kind of like a lighthouse, I guess you would say, or a steering wheel in a way. And grids are not meant to restrict you. I will say that a lot of times people are like, grids, that sounds so restrictive. And in fact, to me, it's freeing, because by knowing if my design choices work or not, I'm given more information on how to make my choices. So that's how I look at it that way. So sometimes I will start a painting with grids to see, but a lot of times I'll do quick sketches, and then I will refine a sketch with grids to see how I can refine it even more. And so I'm not using it every step of the way, but it is there as a guidepost for me to refer back to. And by the way, I will say there's no math involved whatsoever. You don't have to take out any ruler or anything. And that's the best part, because if there was, I would definitely be less inclined to do them. But there is no math with these 3 grids. And if you draw them in the right order, you can just basically make sure you have a straight edge, and that's about it. So as we near the end of this, I'm going to show you the bigger painting soon, but hopefully you can start to see how I'm trying to balance the big, medium, and small shapes. Now, honestly, I think I probably could have done a better job on hindsight. There's a lot of little shapes that I would like to clean up, and that's something that I tend to do. I tend to put a lot of little shapes down, light shapes, dark shapes, and sometimes they can be kind of distracting. So it's just something good to keep in mind when you're doing matrix studies. It can really help you see that. So here is the bigger piece, and you can see that, bigger, you can see that, okay, you can see how some things are working. You can see the form of the rocks, hopefully, and I'm trying not to make things too repetitive. If I were to critique this piece, I would say I have too many repetitive diagonals in the rocks, and I would vary them a little bit, which I'm seeing now. So a lot of times when you see pieces after the fact, you can see a lot of things that you didn't see while you were doing the piece. And so I would probably fix that a little bit. But hopefully you can see how it works as a 2-value study, and that you should be able to see and understand what you were looking at in a 2-value study. It should be abstract, but also be clear. And that's the point of a matrix study to me, matrix or no-tan study. You can see that I have a lot of shapes at the top of the canopy trees in the back to indicate irregularity and kind of offsetting the more kind of structure in the rock. So that's just a brush that I had, and I cut into the canopy with the sky a little bit. Maybe I have too many shapes at the top, I don't know. So I'm always wary of how many little shapes I have and how much that's breaking up the painting. Now that I have my matrix study in Photoshop, it's really easy to select all your dark shapes with the magic wand tool and then copy that onto a new layer. So after I did that, I was able to just brush in value and add a little bit more atmosphere. And that's how easy it is. So I kept my structure, I kept my design. I didn't have to restart and paint over everything. And with the magic wand tool, you can just select your dark shapes. And then once you have that on a new layer, then your light shapes will theoretically be on another layer. And you can really easily add value that way. I've done this with film studies before. So I started doing matrix film studies, and then without starting from scratch, I added value on top of them. And that was a really fun shortcut that I found that I hadn't done before a while back. So this is just a really quick way to add value. And if you're curious about how to do that, I also go over all this more in depth in my color scripting mentorship, from going from matrix to value to color. And I'm running another term this coming September, I believe. So if you want to get into the mentorship, make sure you apply by August. Now, what I did after that was that I started throwing on color, basically just using the same thing. After I separated my dark shapes and my light shapes, I could just add whatever color I wanted. And so this was really fun. I'd actually never done this before. And I was just trying to play with kind of a more abstract palette. At this point, I'm really not trying to stick to the color palette in the reference photo that you saw earlier on the bottom. I'm kind of just playing around and inventing. And sometimes that can be really fun as well. So you're going to see some iterations in the next 3 images or so. And to me right now, I'm using color kind of abstractly to capture that kind of sunny, hazy feel that I want to feel. So now I push some more warmth in the bottom of the rocks to capture some bounce light, and also push the back with some lighter values and push the back canopy of trees into more atmosphere. And you can see I'm still just sticking with the matrix study design. Like really, I'm just adding color within my dark shapes and my light shapes. That's pretty much it. And within those shapes, I'm shifting temperature, playing a little bit with texture and whatnot. And so still keeping within the design. Now you can see I've played now with a little bit more saturation. You can see it push the bounce light a little bit more, push the heat a little bit more. And in the back canopy trees, I've pushed these cooler greens and warmer greens. And again, it's not literal. It's not something you would actually see in real life, but it's kind of what I felt when I saw it in real life, I suppose. And in the last iteration, which I was like, okay, I think I'll stop here, I just added a little bit of glow in some places, and just tweaked with a little bit of color balance and saturation and some areas in the rocks. You can see I added some purple in some of the rocks, some warms even in the back shoreline and things like that, even some warms in the trees. And I thought, all right, I think that's enough playing for now, so we'll leave it at that. But yeah, I hope this whole process helps you to see how powerful it is to start from a 2-value study all the way to a color study. And again, if you want to learn more about all of this, definitely check out my course, Essentials of Painting, because I cover everything from composing to designing with 2 values to then 3 to 5 values, and how adding color connects to all that and enhances the mood and atmosphere based on top of a well thought out value structure. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next tutorial.